Hey people, it's JB Illusion here, and we're here to take a look at another Faction's Legendary Lords. You know, I'm still thinking about all the DLC characters that could have made it. Warhammer has so many special characters, it's really crazy. But then again, Warhammer has existed for a very, very long time. And I'm here to make my case for some great lords that I hope make it into the game at some point in time. We're talking about the Orcs and Goblins this time. Whoa! The great lords that were chosen to lead the Orcs were Azag the Slaughterer and Grimgor Ironhide. The best orc ever. You can see that I'm a little biased right here, I gotta admit it. I am. I really don't think Azag, hit me up in the comments with the correct pronunciation, is the best orc ever. But I will agree that he is pretty cool. But the tactical prowess that he showed and some other abilities are essentially the result of some very un-orcish things. But that's for you to decide. I'm just here to provide some very biased facts. The first legendary lord, Azag the Slaughterer. Azag was a little-known chieftain in the Troll Country, within the chaos-soaked wasteland. Even the war-loving orcs have a hard time thriving within this area, filled with trolls and other vicious monsters. Constant raids by the Northmen and also adds to the issues. With so much fighting, the orcs in the area are kept fragmented and live in sparse tribes that could never form into a right proper wall. That was until Azag found an item called the Crown of Sorcery. After an attack by Chaos Warriors, or, aforementioned Spiky Boys. Oh, I love saying Spiky Boys. The chieftain led his tribe somewhere deep within this harsh, blighted land. Azag found a city that had set in ruin for ages. Taldelheims was what it was called by the humans. When they were living there, deep within the ruins, he and his tribe found a labyrinth filled with demonic monstrosities. Azag led his tribe through the labyrinth, cracking demon skulls. As they headed forward, he eventually stumbled on the lair of a multi-headed chaos troll. After a hard-fought battle, Azag slew the beast, and among the bones and strewn about items, Azag found an ominous crown. Thinking nothing of it, he placed it on top of his head. He was never the same again. Strange thoughts flooded into his head. These thoughts helped him lead his followers out of the cursed city, muttering to himself in a very un-orky tone. Unbeknownst to his tribe, Azag was being controlled by Nagash, the first necromancer. He had sealed a portion of himself within the crown. Soon, though, through cunning, strength, and magic, Azag had managed to conquer the other orcs in the area and begin his war. Goblins from the red-eyed tribe flocked to join him. His precious wyvern, Skullmunch, was presented to him by his loyal followers. Bolstered by these acquisitions, he marched through Kislev and into the Empire. At the Battle of Butcher's Hill, he earned his moniker by destroying a large Imperial army in a pincer maneuver. He was one of mankind's greatest enemies. So I know what you're thinking. He's awesome. Yeah, he is. Just wish he could have accomplished all of this by, not needing the powers and advice of one of the greatest wizards the old world has ever seen. The meteoric rise to becoming one of the greatest war bosses ever would be admittedly fun to play. The battle to first find the crown, taming Skullmunch, and even the Battle of Butcher Hill would be great. But I feel his status as the best is marred by the crown, especially compared to the other great lord, Grimgor Ironhide, the greatest Black Orc warlord to ever live. No one knows about his past, but if you prescribe to the belief that the Black Orcs were created by the Chaos Dwarves, maybe you're hoping that the Chaos Dwarves make it into the game, pretty please. You guys know it would be awesome. But I digress. He staggered out of the blasted chaos wastes with his personal bodyguard, the Immortals. Get it? Starting in the northern part of the World's Edge Mountains, quickly he carved out a small empire for himself. Heading ever southward, it was not too long until he encountered the Dwarves. Time after time, the Dwarves were defeated. Grimgor was content with fighting the armies, and never attempted to take a hold for himself. Eventually, the Dwarves that he had encountered were forced to stay within their giant holds, their cities, and just hide behind their ramparts, lest they lose even more soldiers. Bored that the stunties were not up for fighting, he turned his army to the west into Kislev. He marched through Kislev and destroyed everything in his path. Whole towns and their populaces disappeared. Multiple armies were sent to stop him, but they all failed to stop the ever-marching green tide. The Ice Queen of Kislev had had enough and summoned a giant blizzard to stop Grimgor, but he continued on, losing tons and tons of greenskin lives. But the warrior just seemed to continue going. He seemed to be spurred on by this blizzard. But his advisors, his shamans, knowing that this was a magically created blizzard, told him to turn back, and at the behest of his shamans, he returned again to the mountains. Every time he tried to even think about going back to Kislev, every time he would just turn around and walk a few paces, the blizzard would start up again. So there was no way for him to continue. He just returned back to the mountains. Not before, inflicting even more damage to Kislev on his way out. He decided he needed a base, and he took the dwarven hold Karak Ungor from the Night Goblins and found new enemies, the Skaven. You see, the Greenskins fought the Skaven and became large thorns in the side of Throt the Unclean, the leader of Clan Mulder. Fun fact is, Throt the Unclean and Grimgor Ironhide were actually slated to fight, but seeing the giant rat ogres that Grimgor had stomped in a right proper fashion as the best that the Skaven had to offer, he'd left before Throt showed up, mostly because he had seen the best offense that the Skaven had, and, after beating it, he was kind of unimpressed. He got bored. So, he marched past towards the Mountains of Morn, which eventually led to a battle with none other than Archanon, the Lord of End Times. But, that happened far later. He's literally what an orc should be. He's like the incarnation of Gork. Well, maybe Mork. I would love to play this campaign. We might not get much about his past, but the ridiculousness of the destruction that he laid down on literally the majority of the Warhammer world is amazing. All while being a slightly modified orc. Not under control by, an evil wizard. It's hard to top Grimgor, to tell you the truth of the matter. But there are some people I feel should be added to the list, along with a goblin that I feel has been overlooked heavily. There are quite a few notable greenskins: Borgut, Facebeater, Gorbash, the legendary pit fighter, but none impress me as much as Skarsnik. I had hoped that this goblin would be the other great lord, but I would love to see him and the Crooked Moon tribes as DLC. Mostly because he shows a side to his people we don't see often: natural cunning. The story of this great goblin was recounted by an imperial playwright, Brickenstadt. He was asked / threatened by Snarskink to write down the story of his life. It all began when he crawled out of the dirt and into a fungus-ridden cave. There he commanded his brethren through the dangers of the spawning ground to a camp full of their kind. He was known as a runt back then, for he was the smallest of his kin and also the cleverest. He led other spawning greenskins and then became a slave master. Using his position, he released a captured Skaven and ensured that this Skaven became the leader of his clan. Sadly, his clan was eventually destroyed and scattered. Years later, he became the chieftain of a clan. One night after heavy drinking, he heard a voice telling him to go back home and create a great Wa. So he did just that. His old stomping grounds, Carrick Eight Peaks, was home to two new groups, Skaven and an old nemesis of his. This enemy threw Snarskink into a squig fighting pit, where the goblin war boss met his lifelong companion. For you see, the biggest cave squig was one that Snarskink had helped raise as a slave master. With his new ally, Gobla, he killed his rival and took control of that tribe. With more boys in tow, the next battle was soon at hand. The Skaven army was large, but through a brilliant plan, and some betraying of the Skaven he had saved all those years ago. With their military chain of command in disarray, he launched a simultaneous attack on the Skaven that ensured that they had no time to reorganize themselves and make use of their numbers advantage. When all was said and done, the goblins cheered and held up their hero and chanted the name that a shaman had given Snarskink. I love this character. I mean, I glossed over the goblins wearing Skaven pelts for ambushes, but just having some added tactical battles to the mix would be great. I do wonder how an army of goblins would operate, though, within the confines of the game. Alright, we also have another goblin that really, is really something I wish to see. Grom the Paunch. You see, a group of goblins found themselves without a Wa and in excess of raw troll meat. One thing led to another, and one goblin was challenged to eat it. Theoretically, you see, the troll meat, having regenerative capabilities, should have regenerated to the point that it caused the little goblin to explode. But it didn't. Grom swelled in size but didn't explode. Instead, his body adapted, being able to digest the meat as fast as it grew. Now the de facto leader of his group, due to him having even dwarfed some of the orcs, it was time for a Wa. After crushing a rival warboss literally under his paunch, it was time to leave the Badlands and find some more interesting fights. The dwarves fought the Wa first. After a stalemate, they sent word to the humans that Grom was headed towards the imperial capital of Nuln. So, the emperor at the time decided to move the imperial capital from Nuln to Altdorf. A special grudge is recorded in the Dwarven book for this cowardly act, by the way. Eventually, Grom captured the ghost town of Nuln that still held the riches of a capital city. He did the unthinkable. Next, he just enjoyed life. Soon, an Empire army was able to chase him out of the city, distraught. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do, but then a voice called out to him, tempting him to go west, young git. When he reached the shoreline, he ordered his boys to create the finest ships the orcs could make. A few forests later, Grom and his boys sailed west. A terrible storm and a few naval engagements later, Grom landed in Ulthuan, the home of the elves. You see, the part he was in was not as heavily protected as the rest of Ulthuan, but still held powerful waystones that protected the world. For the first time, and only time, a greenskin managed to sack an elven city. He wrought so much destruction on the town and its people. Some people did not believe that it was orcs perpetuating the assault, but some form of chaos. You see, eventually he was stopped from destroying the Waystones by an elven prince and a reinforcement army. The Greenskins were slaughtered, and no one knows what happened to Grom. Some say he died there, others say he escaped on an elf chariot, but one thing is for sure. I would love to play Grom on this insane journey. He's also very odd in being one of the few greenskins to favor chariot battles. Now it's time for the orc I kind of wish made it instead of Azog. That orc is Gorbad Ironclaw. He is quite possibly the greatest orc general to ever terrorize the old world. Leader of the Ironclaw tribe, he began conquering all those around him. Soon he marched through Blackfire Pass, leaving destruction in his wake. His army made it through the imperial province of Solend, where he engaged and slew the Elector Count of the region, taking possession of not only his crown, but one of the most powerful weapons in Warhammer, a rune fang. Gorbad soon found himself at Altdorf, the Empire's capital. He attempted to use rock lavas to destroy the fortified city, but it wasn't working. After quite a stalemate, a large group of his orcs left, citing boredom. Desperate, now he released his secret weapon, half a dozen wyverns. They flew about the city, eating and destroying. One such victim was actually the Emperor himself. Despite the death, no wyvern had created a way to get into the fortified city. Gorbad lifted his siege and retreated. On his way back to his territory, he encountered the Dwarves on their mission to hunt him down for the crimes he committed against their people. The last anyone had heard of him was of that night where he fought alone atop a pile of his slaughtered enemies. It's whispered among greenskins that one day he will be back, but that remains to be seen. An orc killed the leader of the Empire. Yeah, and he held possession of a rune fang, which he summarily dumped in a river since he had no use for it. Still, this type of campaign sounds great, and acquiring his boar mount and half a dozen wyverns along the way would make an interesting challenge. I'm hoping that these people will be added to the game as DLC Great Lords at some point in time. Tell me what you think about my picks, and maybe check out the last video, or travel to Mordheim to meet Squeak Squeakerson. Thanks for watching, peace out everyone, and have a nice day.